कभी करती हैं मुलाकातें, कभी करती हैं मुलाकातें, कभी यादों में बरसातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें। मन की गहरी झील में कूद जाती हैं कभी, सोच के दरिया के संग संग बहती जाती हैं कभी। चाहे शाम हो या हो रातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें।
Hello and welcome to another episode of Kitabnama. I am speaking today to one of feminism's most iconic figures, Gloria Steinem. Welcome to India, Gloria.
Thank you.
I'm very happy to note that your voice today remains as strong and as influential as it was in the 60s and 70s when you first took the plunge into feminism and activism. What brings you to India today?
The great good fortune of having India, the publishing company, people in general, accept a book of mine. I mean, I'm so proud that it's being published here in English and
That's
Hindi
this book,
and so,
right?
yes,
The Essential
right.
Gloria Steinem,
Right.
As If Women Mattered.
Yeah.
Tell us about this book a bit.
It's a collection of essays that had been published in the States and other countries, and some original writing as well. And very importantly, also Ruchira Gupta, who was the reason this book happened in the first place, and is a great writer, journalist, and inventor of Opniop, a grassroots group working against sex trafficking. It was really her idea, and so she also has done an introduction and really caused this book to happen. So it's a joint project.
What is happening? I mean, if you've been following the news on women's issues, I note that all over the world there have been louder voices, even in places like Saudi Arabia where women are fighting for the right to drive. Certainly in India, we witnessed a lot of movement and a lot of activity since December 2012 in what we call our own December movement. And in the United States, you have a lot of debate happening on a variety of issues, from sexual violence to even you're still debating the Equal Rights Amendment and the greater participation of women in politics. So is there a global thread? What is happening?
It takes different forms in different places. I don't mean to overgeneralize, but I think there are some common forces. First of all, it's always been happening. I mean, I, as an old person, can testify that this has been going on, for 40, 50 years that I know of. But now the press is covering it more. Secondly, we have reached a critical mass of support. In most countries, in public opinion polls, there's more than 50% support for the basic ideas of equality, reproductive rights, everything we've been fighting for. And what that means is that the forces that are opposed to it, the ultra-right-wing, anti-equality, folks who want to control reproduction and so on, are suddenly alarmed. So there's a backlash. In our case, they control many state legislatures. And I'm sorry to say the Republican Party is controlled by ultra-right-wingers, most of whom aren't really Republicans. The religious right also in many different countries, whether it's secular or religious, it's an anti-equality movement that is essentially saying, wait a minute, this is getting to be too much here, okay? And that is also contributing to the fact that it's news. So I think we're all on the cusp. And I think one more thing is happening, and that is that we have realized that this is fundamental to everything. That the biggest determinant of whether there is violence in a country or military violence used by a country is actually not poverty, not natural resources, not religion, and not even degree of democracy. It's violence against females. And where does that come from? From trying to control reproduction. So, we've been sort of deep sixing the idea up to now that we've been talking about production. Important, but not as important as reproduction. And these linkages are now both on the pro and the anti side at their peak.
Does it surprise you sometimes that 5 decades later, since from the time that you started, we are still arguing about the rights of women to control their bodies, something as basic as that?
No, I mean, in the beginning, I thought, these injustices are so great, surely if we just point them out, something will, I was very naive about it, which is, I think, what causes us to burn out, because we think it's a short struggle, and we don't pace ourselves. And that was in large part because I didn't know my history. I didn't understand that in my country, for instance, it took more than 100 years to gain a legal identity as human beings instead of chattel for women of all races and black men. So that's a legal identity. Now we're striving for legal and social equality. It will take at least a century. And we're only, it depends on how you count, but something like 40 or 50 years into it. And of course we have a backlash. It doesn't mean automatically that we're going to succeed.
How do you deal with the backlash? Because we've been experiencing some of that in India, where young interns, for instance, have been speaking up about sexual harassment by retired judges or by senior advocates. And then you have patriarchal forces responding by saying, well, we won't hire women anymore. So how do you deal with the backlash?
Well, first of all, you say, you won't hire women anymore? You've just broken the law. So, you try to, name what's going on and proceed, without getting slowed down by the backlash, and point out where it's coming from. I would say that in general we're better about pointing out the economic interests, that the understanding that women are the cheap labor force of the world. The unpaid or underpaid labor force of the world, wherever we are, by and large. We do point that out, but I think, have not been brave enough about pointing out the politics of religion. And, this is different here in different ways, but in a general way, if God is man, man is God, it's political, right? In fact, godliness is in all living things, and that was the way human beings lived for 95% of human history, with that understanding. But with the desire to control reproduction on the part of various groups of men, godliness, you might say, was withdrawn from women and withdrawn from nature to make it okay to conquer women and nature.
Yes, and yet something as basic as domestic violence, which you point out in your book, has killed more women in the United States than 9/11 and Afghanistan and Iraq combined.
Yes, combined, women and men. Americans killed in 9/11. If you add all that up, Americans, not only women, right? The number of women murdered exceeds that number. And we speak often, obviously, of foreign terrorism, but very rarely of domestic terrorism. But that, I would say, we have to look at the progress, so we understand what to do next. When I was growing up, domestic violence didn't have a name. It was called life. Women in the neighborhood got beaten up on Saturday night, or they even kind of tried to say to themselves, well, he must really care about me, he beat me. The police absolutely did not intervene. It was the single crime in which the police thought it was success to get the victim and the victimizer together again.
Yeah.
So we have a name for it, we have laws, we have shelters. We've progressed a huge distance. But I think we haven't asked enough questions about why it happens, the understanding of why. We haven't looked at the perpetrators enough.
Yes, I'm just surprised that it's not a national crisis or an international crisis, because this is something we have in common. This is something that knows no borders.
No, absolutely no. To the extent that patriarchy in different forms, I don't want to say we're more alike than, but still, patriarchy in different forms exists, then our problems are common. They may be more distant by degree. We have son preference in the United States, clearly, but not anything like the degree throughout Asia that means that the sex ratio has been skewed. So we may be working more on domestic violence, you may be working more on the missing females of the population, just in terms of quantity, you know. But the overall problem is the same. And I think, you know, I think one of the things we haven't looked at, I was thinking about it in Africa, various countries where son preference takes the form of differential feeding often, you know. But in any case, what happens to a woman who is so colonized in her heart and in her soul that she feels forced to penalize and even do away with the child whose body is most like hers? I mean, what happens to her spirit?
Well, perhaps she's not in control of that spirit, which is why she's
no,
forced,
she's not.
yeah.
No, her survival and her marriage and her economic welfare may depend on producing a son. No, it's not her fault at all. I'm just saying we haven't looked at what it does to her.
Yes, absolutely. You first came to India in 56, is that right?
57.
57, soon after graduating.
Yes.
Yes, and you've been coming to India regularly since?
Yeah, for a while I got so obsessed with the movement and what was going, you know, that I didn't come then. I've been coming more often in the last decade or so. I came in the 70s, I came in the 80s. I guess I was coming once a decade before, right?
So what are the changes you've seen? Because they've almost been like milestones, 50s, 70s, 80s. So what are some of the...
Well, you know, one of the great abilities of India, it seems to me, is to add without subtracting.
Okay, what does that mean?
So, well, everything I remember is here, and so is everything else. It's like a miracle, you know. You know, things have changed profoundly. I mean, for instance, when I was living in Miranda House and going to or auditing classes, the tension between males and females in the classroom was so palpable that there were a number of professors who thought that coeducation was not possible. You know, they said, well, you can do it in your country, but we can't do it here. So, okay, that day is gone. It feels campus, you know, feels exciting and people feel comfortable arguing with each other, and that, you know, that's a huge change. And of course technology has you know, changed us all, you know. So when I'm in New York and I call for a car service, I get somebody in Bangalore, you know. Right? And we have a whole conversation. I said, oh, where are you? You know, that kind of easy communication has diminished boundaries a lot.
To me, it seems always like 2 steps forward and 1 step back, because you have social media that has enabled and empowered a lot of ideas getting across very, very quickly, so that Nirbhaya or gang rape in Delhi has reverberations and echoes in Algeria, in Washington. And yet you have a lot of hostility, because a lot of online abuse is directed against women. So it's like I said, 2 steps forward and 1 back. So, you know.
Well, I think we have to understand that the medium isn't the whole message, but it's part of the message. So technology is very, very valuable in all the ways we know, but it also doesn't allow us to empathize, because the chemicals in our brains that allow us to empathize are triggered by sensorily. So without being in the same room, without touch and smell and sight and so on, we don't empathize. And I think it's part of the reason that people feel free to be hostile. It's not just because it's anonymous.
Yeah.
You know, they might be in an audience in the same room and they wouldn't do it, you know, but because they're in the same room. So we need to be more thoughtful about different forms of media and understand that we must never give up being in the same room.
I think this your book mentions that this concept of being in the same room is something you learned from your early years in India.
Yes, it's true. It's true. It took me a long time to realize it, you know, but I think that I would have grown up with more of a conventional idea that change comes from above. if I hadn't completely accidentally. I mean, I had no idea what I was doing here. I was 22. I was just trying not to get married. I'd come and because people were welcoming here, a great quality of India. You know, it's they're wonderfully welcoming, and because wanderers have some protective goddess, I don't know. I ended up getting off. Are there still women-only railroad cars?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Okay. So I was on. I'd spent like 2 days. It was great. It was like a dormitory, and they were very nice to me, and gave me food from their tiffins and so on.
And it was safe for you to travel. You never felt, as a white woman traveling alone in India, you were never threatened.
No, actually, I felt safer in India in many ways. Because there were places of separation here that didn't exist at home. Right. Anyway, I got off the train, and because I wanted to visit a Vinoba Bhave kind of headquarters, because I wanted to learn about the land reform movement. And when I got there, it turned out that this was an area of Ramnad, right? So there were caste riots. And people from the Vinoba Bhave Center had gone to walk through the villages in order to try to express that some sense of communication and to hold meetings and so on. And they'd run out of women. They were fresh out of women. So they asked me if I would go, because they said, if there's not a woman sitting in the circle in the meeting at night in the village, it's less likely that women will come. And so I said, okay, but isn't it weird that I'm, from another country? He said, no, it's no more weird than if you were from New Delhi. I never, and I was wearing saris then and so on. So I ended up walking through the villages for quite a few days and just observing and absorbing that if people sat in a circle at night around kerosene lanterns in the midst of fear, incredible fear, telling stories of awful atrocities, somehow just being able to say it and to be heard and to understand that others had similar experiences and there were people outside who cared. I mean, it just was amazing. And they used to say to me, so the which I think is, I'm sure I'm not repeating Gandhi exactly right, but if you want to know how people live, you have to go where they live. If you want them to listen to you, you have to listen to them. Right?
Okay.
It was that kind of grassroots message.
Excellent. I have one last question for you. You are 79, an amazingly energetic, active 79. What are the one thing or two things that you wish to see accomplished in your lifetime?
How long do we have?
One thing. Okay.
Well,
what is the one thing?
It would be nice. Just selfishly, personally, I've been working on a book for like 12 years, but I'm running around organizing all the time. So I work on it in the summer. So I would like to finish that book. I sort of don't want to die saying, but.
Okay.
But also, I think I get to see what it is that I want, which is just massive groups of young people who care and are there and are out there being brave and imaginative in all kinds of ways I couldn't even imagine. So, I have huge faith in the future.
Great. It's been wonderful talking to you, Gloria Steinem. Thank you very much for being here in India and for influencing and continuing to influence an entire generation of men as well as women.
इस कविता का नाम है बची हुई जगहें। रोज़ कुछ भूलता कुछ खोता रहता हूँ, रोज़ कुछ भूलता कुछ खोता रहता हूँ। चश्मा कहाँ रख दिया है, कलम कहाँ खो गया है, अभी अभी नीला रंग देखा था, वह पता नहीं कहाँ चला गया। चिट्ठियों के जवाब देना, कर्ज़ की किस्तें चुकाना भूल जाता हूँ। दोस्तों को सलाम और विदा कहना याद नहीं रहता। अफसोस प्रकट करता हूँ कि मेरे हाथ ऐसे कामों में उलझे रहे जिनका मेरे दिमाग से कोई मेल नहीं था। कभी ऐसा भी हुआ जो कुछ भूला था उसका याद न रहना भूल गया। माँ कहती थी उस जगह जाओ जहाँ आखिरी बार तुमने उन्हें देखा, उतारा या रखा था। अमूमन मुझे वे चीज़ें मिल जाती और मैं खुश हो उठता। माँ कहती थी चीज़ें जहाँ होती हैं अपनी एक जगह बना लेती हैं और वह आसानी से मिटती नहीं। माँ अब नहीं है, सिर्फ उसकी जगह बची हुई है। चीज़ें खो जाती हैं लेकिन जगहें बनी रहती हैं। हम कहीं और चले जाते हैं, अपने घरों, लोगों, अपने पानी और पेड़ों से दूर। मैं जहाँ से एक पत्थर की तरह खिसक कर चला आया, उस पहाड़ में भी एक छोटी सी जगह बची होगी। इस बीच मेरा शहर एक विशालकाय बांध के पानी में डूब गया। उसके बदले वैसा ही एक और शहर उठा दिया गया। लेकिन मैंने कहा मेरा शहर अब एक खाली जगह है। घटनाएं विलीन हो जाती हैं लेकिन वे जगहें बनी रहती हैं जहाँ वे घटित हुई थीं, जमा होती जाती हैं, साथ चलती रहती हैं, याद दिलाती हुई कि हम क्या भूल गए हैं और हमने क्या खो दिया है।
The title is A Tree, or is it something else? It was a dry desert all round. I too was there. Then I saw it from afar. What is that? I couldn't say at first. Went closer a bit. This is a nice shade. Cool and good, I said to myself on that hot noon. A shade to be sure. I was sure. By the time it was evening, I had my doubts. By nightfall, I slept. Next or another day, I went off again in the desert. Wandered around quite a bit. Was tired and hungry. I saw it again from afar. Walked nearer. Looked at it closer. I said, this is something with many fruits, edible. Took them down all, ate them all, sat near it, took up some work nearby. When I came back to it, it had no fruits on it. Well, I'd eaten them all myself, but, well, I'd forgotten clean that. As it was fruitless now, I wondered, what is this? Though, as I was a belly full, I was not too keen to know what it was or even to ask the question. Let it be anything, I said, and went away from it into the desert. It was night time now. In the deserts, the noon time is sizzling hot, the nights bitter cold. I felt terribly cold, too cold. I saw it again from afar. It is that one, I said. Let me go closer. Let me see. What is it after all? I went closer to it, walking slowly, cold all over. This is firewood. I now knew. Surely wood for fire, this one. I broke its branches, set it alight, warmed myself, slept. Ashes. Next morning, I dusted off the ash, stood up and walked away in the desert. Now, sometime, I think that I would see it again from afar. But now, it stays away from me. And I too have recently been thinking less and less about it. Only this dry desert, without anything to hide behind, comes closer and closer to me. ઝાડ કે શું વેરાન તો હતું જ, હુંય હતો. એટલામાં આગેથી મને એ દેખાયું. આ છે શું? પહેલાં તો કળી ન શકાયું. પાસે ગયો. આ તો છાંયડો છે, શીળો શીળો એ ધકતી બપોરે મને લાગ્યું. નક્કી આ છાંયડો છે મને થયું. સાંજ પડતા સંશય થયો. રાત પડી ત્યાં તો ઊંઘી ગયો. બીજે કોક દાડે હું વળી નીકળી પડ્યો વેરાનમાં. ખાસું ભટક્યો, થાક્યો, ભૂખ્યો થયો. આગેથી એ ફરી દેખાયું. ગયો, જોયું, થયું આ તો કાંક ફળ ભર્યું છે. ઉતાર્યા, ખાધું, બેઠો, કામે વળગ્યો. વળતા જોયું ત્યાં એકે ફળ નહોતું. હું જ તો ખાઈ ગયો હતો, પણ જરા ભૂલી ગયો હતો. ફળ વગરનું દેખાયું એટલે મને ફરી સવાલ થયો, આ છે શું? જોકે ભરે પટે મને એમાં કે એ સવાલમાં જાજો કસ ન જણાયો. જે હોય તે મને શું? મને થયું. હું ત્યાંથી ચાલી નીકળ્યો વેરાનમાં. ક્યારેક વળી રાત પડી. વેરાનમાં તો બપોર દખવે ને રાત ઠારી નાખે. મને ટાળ વાવા લાગી, બહુ ટાળ. આગેથી એ પાછું દેખાયું. આ તો પેલું. મને થયું, લાવ જોઉં તો ખરો ખરેખર છે શું. ધીમે ધીમે ફરી પાસે ગયો, થથરતો. તાપણાના લાકડા હતો. હવે મને સમજાયું, નક્કી તાપણાના લાકડા. તોડ્યા, પીટાવ્યા, તપ્યો, ઊંઘ્યો. રાખ રાખ ખંખેરી વળતી સવારે ફરી હું નીકળી પડ્યો વેરાનમાં. હજી ક્યારેક ક્યારેક થાય છે કે ક્યાંકથી પાછું દેખાશે એ દૂરથી. પણ મને હવેનું એ જાણે મારાથી આઘું ને આઘું જતું રહે છે. મને એકંદરે એની બાબત સવાલો ઓછા ને ઓછા થતા જાય છે. ફક્ત આ વેરાન આળસ વગરનું મારી નજીક ને નજીક આવતું જાય છે.